Hello, everyone, and welcome to Remember and Recommitting, how past experience informs new strategies to decriminalize HIV. My name is Kytara Epps, she, her pronouns, and I am the National Community Outreach Coordinator with CHLP. CHLP is an abolitionist legal and policy organization that envisions and works for a world where HIV and other stigmatized health conditions are no longer criminalized, but met with compassion and the resources to thrive. Today, I'm joined with advocates from Georgia, Missouri, and Virginia on this 35th annual World AIDS Day to learn about their past experiences introducing legislation to combat stigmatizing HIV laws and lessons learned while gearing up to regroup and reorganize for upcoming reintroduction of bills. With a theme of remember and commit, this World AIDS Day, we will have the opportunity to learn from coalitions as they recommit to their fight against HIV criminalization. And so, with that being said, I'd like each panelist to introduce themselves, including their names, pronouns, and which coalition they are a part of. If we can go with Eric first.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Paulk. I use he, him pronouns. I am the co-chair with Malcolm Reed of the, Georgia HIV Justice Coalition.
Okay, and I can pass it to Devin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Devin Hursey, he, him, his. I'm calling in from Lee Summit, Missouri. I'm formerly a member of the Missouri HIV Justice Coalition. I'm not the chair, was not in a leadership role officially, but that's where I did the majority of my work regarding HIV criminalization.
And last but not least, the incredible Deirdre Johnson.
Hello, friends. My name is Deirdre Speaks Johnson, and I am, my pronouns are she, her, and barbecue, beautiful Black queen. I am in the wonderful area of Colonial Heights, Virginia, and I'm representing ECHO VA, or Ending Criminalization of HIV and Over-Incarceration in Virginia. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So I want to move on a little bit and ask about what is the current status of your state coalition. Feel free to jump in as you see fit.
Well, I can say that our coalition is alive and kicking. We've had to take a moment to honestly take a second and take a breather because of our current political reality. I will say, because of the amazing folks in Virginia, we have elected some new leadership in our House, especially we've taken over our Democratic side has come in through on the House and the Senate, House of Representatives, and all of that great stuff. So we're just taking this moment to really educate people of Virginia about this important information, about this, I just said important information, y'all might have to cut that part out, but about this important topic and why it does matter to all Virginians. So we are reassessing, reevaluating, and starting to have our strategic planning 2.0 for as soon as we have our new governor in place in the next year.
I wasn't sure if there was an order, but I can go ahead and jump in. Okay. So first I want to say, well, I want to honor the members who have been involved with the Missouri HIV Justice Coalition and acknowledge specifically Latricia Miles, who founded the coalition many years ago. The state of the coalition, I think that we're mostly inactive at this time. There is a bit of a social media presence, and I know that there are frequent inquiries as to the status of the coalition and how folks can get involved from various parts of the states, including when I was in Middle Missouri in Columbia. There were some folks, I believe students at Mizzou, who would message the social media pages and want to get involved, and many other people who are living with HIV within the state who are curious. That's kind of where we are. We're just mostly inactive. I believe I want to make sure that I'm covering. Yeah, so that's the status of the coalition. I believe I've answered that.
Yeah, and so similar to Virginia, I would say that the Georgia HIV Justice Coalition is also like alive and well and kicking. One of the things that we understood, reforming the law here in Georgia was that our work didn't end at reforming the law. I think similar to other states who recently were able to get reform efforts through, they weren't complete, right? There were things, there were compromises that were made in order for us to, think about how we provide the greatest amount of protections under the current political realities that we're currently in our individual states. And so we knew that there would always be sort of a 2.0 strategy where we would go back and sort of like think about, reevaluate how we would position ourselves to go for take sort of another bite at the apple around reforming the law and what that looked like. And so that is a part of a strategy that is probably a little bit off. We don't think that that's something that we can currently do. And so, part of, what the work of the coalition is currently is around this sort of like education piece. We want to make sure that we're educating folks around the fact that, there were reforms that were made. This is the impact of what those reforms are. And then we want to bring you on board to the coalition to help us as we think about strategizing around this 2.0 strategy. The other thing that we, are very conscious of is that, the fact that we reform the law doesn't mean that there aren't people who still aren't being criminalized. And so we want to be steadfast in our advocacy, for folks who are still facing charges, even though we were able to get, I think a really good piece of legislation passed. But there are folks in Georgia who are still being criminalized under the statute. And so the coalition exists currently as a way to support folks who are currently, facing charges. And then I think the last piece is really around sort of like advocating for, folks, who are previously, been charged. How do we think about grandfathering some of the reforms in? How do we make people whole who have served time and already been criminalized under the law? And so that's kind of where we are in Georgia, active, building, back the momentum back up, building a larger team, but still definitely active.
Thank you so much for that. Looking back over the past couple of years, what is the biggest lesson you've learned from passing or trying to pass legislation? And we can start off with Devin.
Hey, thank you. So I'll just start off saying it's a tricky space. There's been harm done. And my little disclaimer, for me personally, being a person living with HIV, it can be a little bit messy maintaining the professional and the deeply personal. And I know I'm not the only person who's living with HIV who has to navigate those spaces. A lot of the things that occurred, I believe if there was a stronger sense of MIPA, we could have prevented them. And again, being a person living with HIV who operates professionally within the state of HIV, there's often expectations that we maintain a certain sense of professionalism so that we can maintain our relationships beyond this work. For me, I have this, I just remember the condition that I was in when I was newly diagnosed. And personal commitments that I made to do whatever it takes to make sure that my perspective was heard in defense of other folks who felt vulnerable in that way. And oftentimes I feel like I'm willing to say things, to be messy if that's necessary, so that other folks don't have to feel as compromised professionally. So as far as lessons learned, because that is the question, correct? Lessons learned. We could foster a stronger sense of MIPA, meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. We can clarify that that does not mean that we have a person living with HIV who is appointed or self-appointed to okay or rubber stamp everything. That means that we are going to go back to our community, make sure that we are making decisions that serve everyone, so that we can actually, not leave anyone behind. So yeah, I think that's the biggest lesson, so that we can actually understand MIPA instead of using like a gatekeeper politic, or just self-appointing ourselves to be that go-to person.
Deirdre, would you like to go next?
Sure. One of the things that I would say is that there's not a cookie cutter approach for every state. And although a lot of people may say, oh, well, do this and this is going to happen, when you look at the political reality, the social reality, the everything reality, life be lifing in your state, what happened for Virginia may not be something that would happen for another state. Um, so that was probably the biggest lesson that I learned, is that other people, other states, what they did may not work in our state, and what happened in our state may not work in another. So just being able to understand that it's not a cookie cutter approach. This is all you making it individualized for your state, for your folks that are vulnerable, that are impacted most by these HIV criminalization laws that are archaic, need to go on some levels away. When I say away, we already know is if they are fully reformed, then people are still going to be trying to attack those of us living with HIV, and for reasons, those of us that have reasons to prevent HIV from happening to them. Folks are still going to be coming for us, and we've seen that in this lifetime, especially in the last few months, how there have been attacks on people for lifestyles, for how they live their lives authentically. So that is going to continue to happen whether these laws are in existence. And I think it's safe to say that there are coalitions across the country that are like, not in my backyard, not in my state, not here, and we're trying to fight with each other to make sure that that doesn't happen to our community. The other part that I learned is that I'm stronger than I thought that I was, and I didn't know honestly that my voice mattered. And this was the first time that my voice actually mattered, and it mattered in a way that was going to save not just my life, but other people's lives, and how that impacted not just my little first circle, but the broader community and those Virginians living here at all. So that was an eye opener. I didn't understand at the time what we were going through and what we were doing, but the impact that it had is life changing, not just for me, but for all Virginians here. And I'm honestly even just still, it's still hitting me that other states have utilized what we have done as a template to possibly help their state as well. And that's big and that's huge. And if you know me, you know that, especially not just me, I have to give my favorite shout out to my favorite partner in change, Dr. Cedric Pulliam. That is just who we are. We really are excited about this work, but that is a major thing that we did as a coalition. And in 2 years, and I also have to give credit what credit is due, is VORA was another organization that was in existence, but because of funding, they had to go out of existence because of funding. And for us to come in 2 years and do what we were able to do during a pandemic, not able to fully go into the court, not into the courthouse, but into the our state legislators' offices in person is a big feat. I pray that no one else has that pleasure of having to go through that, because it was a lot of rapid response, and it was a lot of work, but it was definitely well worth it.
Eric, thank you both.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna echo some of the same things that my colleagues and friends have already lifted up. I think the lessons learned in Georgia, I think one is around political realities. Like, I think it's really important to understand the political realities of your state, and understand what navigating those political realities look like. So I think that's kind of a number one. Number two, I think, is around non-negotiables. I think, early in the coalition work, deciding like where you are willing to compromise and where you're absolutely not willing to compromise. I think that's really, important. One, just because I think it does like some just really good grounding and level setting with the group. But then, just the realities of like legislative session, where we can all kind of like come to some consensus or understanding about like, if, someone wants to, make a compromise, like we can say yes or no and make those decisions, quickly if we need to, without, fear of leaving any voices out of that conversation, right? So really deciding those sort of like non-negotiables, up front. I think the third thing is like, centering the voices of the folks who are most impacted. Like that is, how we've, led the coalition here in Georgia. I actually think this is something that all states can do, Deirdre, should be doing, is that, leading in that way where folks who are most impacted are leading that decision-making process. I think maybe the last piece is really around, oh my God, I lost my train of thought for a second. So non-negotiables. Oh, the next one is like, it's a long process, right? Like, it's not gonna happen quickly, right? I think preparing folks in the coalition around the fact that it's probably not gonna be a quick process, but that we gotta show up every time. And so I'll, just full transparency, during the several years that we were working on the reform efforts here in Georgia, there were some meetings where I was just on the coalition meeting by myself. I signed the roll, I was there, I checked in, I showed up, we held the space. But that is so important because I think, folks need to know like we're in it, and that we're not taking like any stops, that we just gotta like really keep going. And so I think those are kind of like the top of mind things that I think are really important in the coalition work. I guess one sort of additional thing is like we all bring different skills to the table, and all of those like things that we bring to the table are equally important. And I know sometimes in coalition work, where you're working with national partners or, you're working with lawyers or you're working with whoever, we all are able to contribute like our piece to the coalition work. And all of those pieces are equally important. And so I think like naming that in the coalition space is also really important.
Great, thank you all for answering that. So in the same vein, and if this applies to you, what does it mean to regroup as a coalition? And how are you navigating that process? I see Deirdre shaking her head, so I'm gonna pick on her first.
This regrouping is an eye opener, to be honest, because we thought that honestly the whole time that we would be like that chugga 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 chugga, because this is not a sprint, y'all. This is a marathon, and so you got to be prepared for the long haul, in this process. And we currently, and thank you, Eric, for bringing up the non-negotiables. When we met in 2018 and we had our strategic planning meeting, we had some non-negotiables, and one of those was anything with the felony we weren't going for. And in order for us, and where we're at now is that we still have one little small little piece on there that we're really trying to work hard, but our political reality changed right after we changed this law. And so that actually had us to sit back. That really created a space where we had no choice but to regroup, because we knew that if we had tried to press forward during that political shift, then it would have created more damage than what we had already, in all of the amazing work that we had done. So we really had to take a step back. We've been sitting back looking at strategy and trying to figure out when is the best time to move forward. All right, and even though we can't move forward right now, what can we do is in this sitting part that is still going to be effective and impactful? And what we have decided, in this space was one, let's continue to educate, educate, educate. Reasons why we're here now, to make sure that there are other coalitions that are out there that may see this presentation and say, hey, okay, we're doing pretty good, because I'm sure that folks got some questions out there like, I don't think we're doing this right. There is no right or wrong, just as long as even if you're in the meeting by yourself, like Eric, as long as you're doing something. And so that is the biggest part. We hate the fact that we have to sit and be quiet. And if you know anything about Deirdre Johnson or Deirdre Speaks, I like to be doing something. And it's had us to sit down and have to hold your mule and figure out, where is this mule going to be going, or do we need a horse instead of a mule? Do we need something else? Just trying to figure out what is the best things to continue to move us forward. So all of that to say, it has been hard, because we do want to be pressing forward and seeming like we're doing something, but at the same time, we are doing stuff. And even sitting on these sessions, talking to other coalitions about best practices and just providing intel, providing just support, has been the best part of a regroup, and also trying to figure out what our next practice or what our next steps are going to be. But I hate it, but I love it, because it's going to get us positioned and ready for when the political reality does change. Because I'm hoping we were able to get our house and everything together. Now we just got to work on the head and with our governor, because we already know he's not pressing forward, and he's not going to accept some of the things that we have proposed in our space right now.
Eric,
Can you repeat the question, please?
yes, of course. What does it mean to regroup as a coalition, and how are you navigating that process?
And so, Devin, I can hop in. And so, I think for our coalition here in Georgia, I think I think regrouping has been actually a really good thing for us. I think we all sort of like define wins differently. And I think that as a coalition, we've always tried to define what our wins are very sort of like broadly. And so, yes, it's a win to like reform the law, but the broader win is, how do we bring, folks closer to like, liberation, right? And so I think if that's our mindset, then, we are always sort of like adjusting and, making pivots accordingly, right? And so, we knew that there would be folks who would just, no longer be interested in some of the coalition work, because they saw the win as sort of like passing the legislation, right? And I just think that in movement spaces is so important, one, for folks who have carried this work for, the number of years to be able to, one, take a break, and then also create a space for new voices. And so we sort of see our regrouping as like a space for us to like create space for new voices, and also to like honor the work that has happened with a group of folks who have like, held the torch for a number of years in the efforts around the coalition work. And so I think, those two things are just like really important, like tensions to sort of like think about. And so as we're sort of like shifting around what our strategy looks like, that it is more focused on sort of like educating people, really leaning hard into like the advocacy side of things, as opposed to like purely like the legislation. I think this is like a good space for us to sort of like bring in those new voices that allow for us to like accordingly make the pivots to sort of honor the space that we're in this moment as a coalition, and to sort of like lead those efforts that are more around education, that are more around advocacy, as opposed to sort of like this piece around legislation. And so it's been a good process, but it is a process of like also building. And so, there's definitely the building that is happening. And so I feel like we're in a good space and are bringing on new and diverse voices to lead us where we are in the moment, and to answer the call for where we are right now.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and jump in. So the question, how do we regroup? First, I want to give you a little bit of background. It's really hard to appreciate where we are without understanding where we've come from as a coalition. So we had a very strong coalition, like many other states do and have had. There were some personnel changes. Our fiscal agent transitioned from one executive director to a different executive director. I got the impression that the new ED was just very ambitious. Many of the very active, dedicated Black advocates kind of didn't feel very positively about the new executive director and left immediately. And over time, and especially reflecting on this time in our coalition, someone voiced that they've never seen a more systematic assault on Black advocates within coalition spaces. They said specifically that there's bad faith actors and instances of harm in pretty much every coalition, but they've never seen it occur as systematically as it did in Missouri. So from there, and me wanting to stick it out and really give the new executive director some grace as they were coming into a new space, it turned into a situation where I was kind of framed as the dissenter whenever I would speak up against instances of harm, when really for me, I saw it as me being willing to educate someone who is kind of new to these spaces. They appointed someone to chair the coalition that, of course, had a favorable opinion of them and would allow them to pass what they needed to pass. And that's pretty much how the executive director navigated the coalition. So when we get to these questions or these issues that both of you have raised about non-negotiables, and when it comes to making tough decisions, we can't even really have that conversation because when it came to those issues, like we kind of know who was in control of making those decisions, those who would make it possible for us to pass the bill that they wanted passed, those who were willing to make the compromises and have those difficult conversations. So what does it look like to regroup from there? Well, we received an email that said, although this organization focuses on issues of criminal law reform, on issues of poverty and benefits. Issues regarding people living with HIV are too niche. So in other words, they said that now that the bill's passed, the funding is spent, we need to figure out, well, I had left the coalition by this point, but now that the money's spent, the bill is passed, the coalition needs to figure out what they're gonna do, essentially in the email. I wasn't gonna let anybody talk to me like that, so I had been gone. So with that said, there's an opportunity to get a new fiscal agent. I think the first thing that needs to happen is some re-engagement with former members, the founders specifically, and then other folks who have supported the coalition, to let them know that their contributions have always been valuable and are still valuable. I think that there is an opportunity to build and network with the social justice advocates that remain in this state, because there's a lot of work happening. So yeah, I think this is a really good time to just get out there, because especially within the policy space, there's a need for Black voices across the board if you're really following what's happening in Missouri. So that's what it means for us to regroup.
Wow, thank you all for sharing your experiences. Speaking of regrouping, what do you hope that the coalition will refocus on when they seek to reestablish legislative priorities? And also, what values are you hoping to bring to this refocus? And we will do it. Let's start with Eric this time.
All right, Kytara. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about, what was accomplished, right? Legislatively. And so in our reform, we were able to remove provisions around needle sharing, around solicitation, donating blood or organs. We were able to remove sentence enhancements for spitting on a police officer, enhanced penalties for spitting on a correctional officer. We are also able to add mens rea. We were able to add people first language. We were able to add a provision specifically around protecting folks who are victims of sexual assault. We are also able to add some language specifically from the CDC around it had to be sexual acts must have a significant risk based on scientifically supported levels of risk of transmission. Like, that language was really important. And then we are able to reduce the felony to a lesser felony. And so when I think about like what's left on the table, I think the big piece is around the felony, right? And so that is definitely a priority for us, is to, make sure that this is a misdemeanor. And I know there's a lot of conversation still around sort of like, do we want to reform, these laws, or do we want to completely get rid of the laws completely, right? And I mean, there are two sort of like camps of thought specifically around that. I think both of them are valid, right? And so I think what we're tussling with mostly is around this piece around the felony, and getting that reduced to a misdemeanor. I'd also like lifted up that, what does restorative justice look like? What does expungement look like for folks who have been previously criminalized under the statute? And so that is another piece that I think is really important for the coalition to think about and to be considering right now. And so I think those are kind of like the two pieces that were kind of left on the table that we definitely want to like go back and make sure that we get the second bite at the apple to try to reform those.
And I'll jump in as well. And for Virginia, a lot of our stuff is very similar to Georgia. We too still have a felony on the books for intent. So that is the biggest piece that we want to go back in and say, let's go ahead and sweep those crumbs off the table. If our preference would be to have it go down to a misdemeanor, is our preference. That was one of our non-negotiables, was like, if anything that was going to be a felony, we were like, no. But we also recognized that, we couldn't throw out the whole kit and caboodle with all of the amazing advancements that we had gotten, which was, we were able to change where disclosure there's not a penalty if you do not disclose your status. And it's not only just now in Virginia, our law was for people living with HIV, hepatitis, and syphilis. And so we wanted to expand that because we already knew that folks weren't being criminalized for syphilis or for hepatitis. It was fully on HIV. And there have been cases in our state that folks were criminalized or even alleged, and how it has completely damaged their lives with the media attention that was brought to this whole deal, and even if those cases were dropped. So we expanded ours to include all sexually transmitted diseases. So there is no disclosure. You don't have to disclose your status. We also there's no penalty if for donating blood or organs, as well as there's no mandatory testing if you were picked up for drugs, because that was actually mandatory. If you were picked up for drugs and or for solicitation, then automatically it was definitely you were doing an HIV test. That no longer is in existence. So we were able to do that. What I do hope is that we will be able to change that felony to a misdemeanor. But I also hope that the powers that be will see how dramatic it is, or even not even just dramatic, how stigmatizing it is to have these laws on the books specific to people living with HIV. And not only that we're being criminalized for having a chronic illness that is able to be managed. Now, the other part, there was a law that was introduced, or excuse me, there was a bill that was introduced prior to our bill that, which I need to also stress, our bill was community-led and driven and written, where this previous one was creating a viral underclass, where they only wanted to specifically, if you were a person that was undetectable, then you didn't have to worry about anything. Well, that we already know completely still already works against public health. And for those individuals, one, that don't know their HIV status, or two, have just found out their HIV status, it also puts them at a disadvantage that they could be prosecuted because of that. And we did not want that to happen. Hence why we wrote this community-led bill that was like, no, we're not creating any undue harm for any Virginian, period, point blank. No matter if you know your status, whether you want to seek treatment or not, that is your personal choice. So the hope and prayer is that we can get rid of that felony to where it will be a misdemeanor, and then we can continue to educate our legislators about how demeaning it can be to criminalize people living with any chronic condition at all.
Devin, do you have anything to add to the question?
Sure. So I think that Missouri can revisit our values, especially when it comes to MIPA, as I stated previously, meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. I know it's a simple enough concept, but it really took me a while to fully understand what MIPA means. Again, it doesn't mean that due to the simple fact that I'm living with HIV, that I get to approve what does and does not happen regarding people living with HIV. It means that we are responsible for making decisions that are going to serve the HIV community overall, and that are going to make sure that no one is left behind, and make sure that those members of our community who are not heard are heard. As people living with HIV, who experience HIV stigma and the nuances of living with HIV, we have the expectation is upon us to work with other members of our community. It's really just that. And I know that, you know, it sounds, I mean, it's pretty intuitive on the surface, but we exist within systems that don't really share those values. So it's on us to, you know, make that happen. Especially when within policy spaces where there are opportunities to make things work a lot faster if we just move along without properly engaging the community. It's an issue if someone who has institutional power, who is not a person living with HIV, is able to determine who the chair of our coalition is unilaterally. That's a problem that is not MIPA. It is a problem when we, whenever journalists want to engage with the coalition and find out what's happening and, you know, what do you have to say on behalf of the victory that you've all received on HIV criminalization. It's a problem when the executive director determines who the journalists speak to. So the story doesn't even really get out. They don't really get to hear from people living with HIV because they know that when we had our debrief following the bill, it was a very somber occasion. No one was happy. They don't want that story to get out. So that's important for people outside of the state to know when they're really evaluating and assessing what has happened in the Missouri branch of the movement that we're all a part of. Missouri is not happy with what happened. And then also, when this coalition is ready to seek out a new fiscal agent, it's important that we remember that we want to have our autonomy as a coalition. We don't want to be bound to the priorities of a nonprofit again, because we see where that's gotten us. We need to be aware of what has happened and what is happening among the other policy nonprofits within the state. I mean, I don't want to say too much on that, but you can research it because it's been all over social media. But yeah, I think I can leave that there. We want to make sure that we are laying a strong foundation for us to make a comeback.
Great, thank you, everyone. You all spoke kind of about non-negotiables and really understanding your state's landscape and that political moment as well. How do you approach legislative compromises, especially if there is no consensus among coalition members? And let's hear from Deirdre first.
One of the things I also, want to let folks know is that our coalition, when we met in 2018 and created and did our strategic plan, one of the things that our coalition members, because we had a wide array of folks that were sitting at the table. And some of them had positions that would not allow for capacity for them to do some of the things that would, that were front facing, forward facing, engaging with some stuff. And so they elected myself and Dr. Cedric Pulliam to really be the voice of the coalition. Now, the two of us took that on very seriously. But at the same time, what we chose is that we were not going to make sole decisions just between the two of us. So anytime decisions did come about that were really important, like, for example, it was discussed that we have a full repeal once we introduced our bill into the Senate, because we went through the Senate. And it was discussed and it was brought to us and we were excited about that. Yay. But then when it came to the felony with intent, when it came to that, we literally, Cedric and I'll never forget this. We got on the phone and did a phone tree. Like, you take these X amount of people, I'm gonna take this X amount of people, and we're gonna call. And that's what we did until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. It was on a Friday afternoon. Like, we found out like late night. And by the time we finished, it was almost close to 2 o'clock in the morning making all of these calls. And to be honest, most of our coalition members were like, nope, we said that we're not dealing with that felony, so we're not going to press forward. Let's leave it and try this thing again. And so after, getting our answers, Cedric and I sat down and were like, well, what is going to be in the best interest of all of the other people that are living in the state? And we had to make the hard decision to say, no, we've really got some amazing wins. And if we say no to this one part, it's going to throw it all out, because we had an inkling that our political reality was going to change. And so, although majority of our members, it said, no, let's throw it all out. It's over, it's done. We were like, no, we cannot. And I'm so glad that we, number one, had conversation with our coalition members, got their insight, and then we sat down and said strategically, listen, we can't guarantee that this is going to be this, the golden ticket again in 2 years or 1 year or 30 days from now, so let's chance it and try it. And we did. And I'm glad that we did. And even our coalition members that were against that were like, I know I was against it, but I'm actually glad that you all took an executive decision and said no. So we always, even though a lot of times people will see either myself or Dr. Cedric Pulliam in spaces, please know that we are always in conversation with our coalition members, because I'm not the whole state. Cedric's not the whole state. And we have different voices, different things that are coming at the table. One of the things that we also recognizes that we had a need for those that were impacted and or those that have actually experienced this law for themselves. And we really had a conversation with them as well and said, hey, listen, what are your thoughts? And they were really the voice of us. And they said, this is how I feel about it. And we added that. And that was the biggest, I think that if there's any part, a lot of folks are thinking that it's just ran by Deirdre and Cedric. No ma'am, no ham, no spam. It is not by far. It is ran by all of us in our coalition. It just so happened that we were elected, if you will, selected, not elected, but selected to really be the voice. The one part that I would also say is that that was the part that we didn't want to compromise, was making sure that the voice of our coalition members were not heard. Like, we wanted to make sure that we were not compromising, if any piece was the fact that our voice from all coalition members that come from all different walks of life were represented, and their voices were heard and did matter. So that was one piece. And then I feel like let's see what else. If we had the opportunity, there's also something that I also want to just kind of throw out there. Echo VA did all of our coalition work with zero funding. Zero. Zilch. Folks have not gotten paid to do this work at all. And I know it is a shocker for some folks to actually know that, but we have not gotten that. And what we have set ourselves up for in this lifetime is that we're now trying to get places and people in spaces so that other coalitions can have that funding to move some of the things forward that they need to have moved forward. So that is a big surprise. We did this with no money. We did this in the middle of a pandemic. We're still doing this with no money. Although I will say thank you. Sero Project is my full-time job. When Tammy Hott came around and she did our strategic planning, I said to Cedric, I want to do what she does. And now I do have the honor and privilege that for the Sero Project that I'm the National Programs and Strategic Planning Manager, and I assist other states and coalitions that are working on this to give them some assistance. And if you want to say that's how I'm getting paid, then that's how I'm getting paid. But when it comes in the context of ECHO VA, as an ECHO VA coalition member, we do not have any funds that are coming forward. And that is something that actually is changing this year because we are able to secure that. So I think I answered that question and then some, but just know that, yeah, we didn't want to compromise on the felony, but we ended up compromising, and we think that that was the best thing yet. And we have a 2.0 strategy that we'll be jumping into in the next 2 years at the most, once our head of our Commonwealth changes.
Okay. Eric, want to go?
All right, so I'd say very similar to Deirdre. One, we ran our coalition also without like any funding, but then in terms of like, the pieces that we still wanted to work on, uplifting that felony piece, and then this piece around sort of like restorative justice. But then, I think in terms of like kind of the decision-making process as it relates to the coalition, one was really starting with those like non-negotiables and sort of like the coalition sort of strategic plan, right? So these are the things that we're deciding on, like, it's just a no-go. And so I think establishing those things were really important. I think the other thing is that we try to kind of operationalize the coalition as much as possible. And so like we created a set of values, a set of guiding principles that were kind of like our North Star. And so anytime that we, got into a situation where we're not able to like gain consensus around something, we went back to our principles and our values. What do our principles and our values tell us? And, is a decision that's on the table, where does that fall, right? If it falls outside of those principles and values, we should move forward with it. If it is within those principles and values, it's something that we should proceed with, right? And so that was really kind of the framework that we utilized, really around sort of like making, decisions. Again, I think it's sort of like going back to what I had said before around sort of like, this is like greater like liberation work. It's not just about like reforming the law. And so I think that when we're, doing work in that way, it calls for us to go back to what our values and what our principles are and what is like the driving factor behind the work that we do. And so that's sort of the framework that we utilize and sort of like making decisions that were often, tough and required a lot of additional conversation and nuance and all that stuff. But like going back to those values and principles really helped to like really support us in making the decisions that were in line with the coalition in its totality.
And last but not least, Devin.
Yeah, so when it comes to making those difficult decisions, in an ideal circumstance, we'll be privileging those who are directly impacted by whatever the issue is. So if we're struggling with decisions regarding sex workers, we want to engage those who have experience, in sex work spaces, or those who will be more vulnerable to a particular part of the law. So I think that's a pretty easy way of well, in my mind, that's kind of like obvious. If someone is directly impacted, we want to hear from them. We want to know how to navigate a particular issue. We want to know if there's a better alternative, because that person's going to be your expert. It's important to engage experts in this space. Unfortunately, what happened, I think the issue, we came up against this issue regarding removing penalties for those who throw bodily fluids at correction facility workers. We got a lot of pushback saying that they didn't want to remove that penalty, and that was really a non-negotiable for them. They said that they would support our what we wanted to do if we would keep penalties, enhancements. You're right, for those who were throwing feces or bodily fluids at correctional workers. Okay, so the way that issue was managed and a few other issues was we were invited to a meeting. It was essentially like a poll. We were told that this is not a time to debate the issues. There's no discussion to be had here. We just want to take this poll. This poll was managed by our chair at the time, who was appointed by the executive director. And we just gave answers to a poll, which were then used. And mind you, everyone's vote carried the equal weight. The answers on this poll were used to justify the decisions that the executive director wanted to make. So it's kind of how it worked. Not an ideal circumstance by any means.
So we're almost at the end of our wonderful webinar, and just really in awe of the knowledge that you guys have and are bringing to this webinar for other coalitions and other advocates. And so I want to leave with this one last question is, what gives you hope about your work over the next year? And also what gives you pause? And Devin, I'm gonna let you start this time.
Yeah, so there's a lot of harm being done in Missouri. Like even in Kansas City, there are people who nationally you might think that they're doing a lot in Missouri, but locally we know no, they're kind of co-opting the voices of LGBT folks. Across the state, within Kansas City, within Missouri, within other parts of the state, there are people who are really here to showboat and not really organize with the community, but definitely to take credit for everything. And that's because they have a robust PR like presence behind them. What gives me hope is that the community is kind of hip. Like we've come to a point where we've identified who those people are, how they're using our lives to benefit them, potentially running a future campaign. And we're ready to do what it takes to not let them speak on our behalf anymore. And that goes within Kansas City and across the state. So I have hope because there are coalitions of survivors of violence organizing in Kansas City. There are coalitions of trans folks coming up across the state. People living with HIV and Black gay men have organized in Kansas City specifically, but have strong relationships across the state. So I think that right now people are ready to mobilize. We're ready to organize even more than what we've done to get our individual organizations off the ground. We are talking to each other now. We're ready because we realize that, individually, these people are able to get over on us. But when we start talking to each other directly and not being so suspicious of one another, we realize that, these folks are causing harm to us in the same ways, using the same patterns and the same tactics. That gives me hope.
Mm-hmm.
I can hop in. So the thing that gives me hope really is that, in a state like Georgia, that we're able to like get a reform passed, and get it passed without a lot of opposition. Shows me that we should be hopeful about the work that we're doing. It took several years, it took, 5, 6, 7 years to get there. But, I think that if we're able to make change in a place like Georgia, I think that we are able to make change anywhere.
Okay, that was a mic drop moment. Um, literally, because that's it. That's all. We can go ahead and end the webinar right there with what Eric just said, because that's literally where what gives me hope is that we have states that are creating safe spaces for people living with HIV that have reasons to prevent HIV and STDs from happening to them. That's what gives me hope, that there are folks like us that are still having these conversations, bring these things to the forefront, having awareness, having education. That's what gives me hope, that there are new advocates that are like, hey, I'm ready to put my hat in the ring, and let's go toe to toe. What we got to do? Where do I need to go? Where do I need to sign up? What do I need to do? That there are advocates that are on fire. Um, every time I hear on fire, it's like I'm on fire for Jesus. But they're on fire for justice. At the end of the day, and wanting to make sure that this does not happen to another person. And that, there's a saying that you don't know that you care about HIV criminalization. You care about HIV criminalization, you just don't know it yet. And that's just where we are, to have people like my parents, my amazing parents, to really come to an HIV is not a crime conference and to see, oh, wow, this is what you've been wow, this happens. And it's not just in Virginia, it's in other states. And they're able to now go back to their circles and share with their friends, their families, their communities, and say, hey, this is going on. Did you know? Have you talked to somebody? You want to join in on this? So that is what's giving me hope. What's giving me pause is that there is a lot of our communities are under attack in ways that we should not be. Our loved ones should not be at fear for walking down the street, for wearing whatever they want to wear, being their authentic selves, in school, in at home. That's what's giving me pause, but all of those hopeful things are outweighing those pauses. And I do fully believe that there is going to be an end to HIV criminalization in our lifetime. And it is because of people like Eric, a Devin, a Kytara, an Amir, of Dr. Cedric Pulio. There's a Jada Hicks, there's a Mandisa, there's
A
Tammy,
Deirdre.
a Deidre. That there are all of these amazing people that are out there. Thank you, Eric. Oh, thank you. That's what's giving me hope, and because it's definitely outweighing the pauses. We're gonna get there, and we're able to do it together, and we're not doing it in silos, and we're learning from each other, we're teaching each other, and we're helping to support each other. So I hope that everyone, if any piece that folks that are watching this are reinvigorated, that you are re-energized, that you are ready and to know that there are people that are doing this work, and we need you and we want you. Just even abre la boca, just open your mouth and share this information, share this webinar with folks. So yeah, that's what it is for the day.
See, there's my drop. And that brings us to the end of this wonderful webinar. I want to thank all three of you. I hope this has really re-inspired or just inspired anyone who is watching this or who will watch it. And with that being said, thank you, everyone, and Everyone have great, happy holidays.